Deepak Malhotra is a professor in the Negotiations, Organizations, and Markets Unit at the Harvard Business School. He teaches negotiation in the MBA program and in a wide variety of executive programs, including the Owner-President Management Program, Changing the Game, and Families in Business. Deepak has won numerous awards for his teaching, including the HBS Faculty Award by Harvard Business School's MBA class of 2011, and the Charles M. Williams Award from the Harvard Business School. In both 2011 and 2012, the MBA students selected Deepak to give the Best of EC Year speech to graduating students. So without further ado, Professor Malhotra.
Thank you. Good afternoon. How are we doing? All right, a couple of quick points before we jump into the topic. I'm wearing a mic, and the reason is the session apparently is going to be videotaped. And I'm not sure yet whether it will actually show up anywhere, but the few things that I do know is that the folks that are videotaping are under strict orders not to videotape any of you. And the reason I mention that is because a lot of what we're going to do is going to be some Q&A. And at that point, whatever question you have, you should feel comfortable asking. And I will try to address literally any question you may have. The only thing I'll ask on the questions is, to the extent possible, make it a generalizable question. Make it a question that may be relevant to people that are, greater than one in this room. And so even if your question comes from a specific area, if you can put it in a way that's a little bit more useful to everybody, that would be great. I'm going to do this in a slightly different way than I've done in the past. I've held a session like this occasionally on my own, occasionally with a colleague of mine, Max Bazerman, for the last few years. And we typically launch into Q&A about 5 minutes into the session. This time I decided to do it a little bit differently. I'm going to start out with about 15 pieces of advice that are preset based on the kinds of questions I've heard often in sessions like this, in one-on-one conversations with my students or other folks, the kinds of things that you may run into. And so as we go through those 15, my guess is that some of those are going to be obvious to you or intuitive to you. Some of those may not be relevant to you. But my guess is also that there may be one or two things in that list of 15 that everyone looks at and says, oh, that's kind of interesting. I hadn't quite thought about that, or that's actually quite relevant to what I'm doing. And the one thing that's most relevant to you may be different from the one thing that's most relevant to you. But I'll go through all of these because in the past they've been relevant to at least some people in each room. So we'll do that, and then we'll go into Q&A. The only other thing I'll say is a lot of the action that happens in the job market season isn't necessarily at the table. It's not when you're sitting across the table from the person you're negotiating with. It's a lot of the stuff that happens before or after. And some of the points I'm going to touch on are going to hit those. But there may be additional questions that are relevant to you in that domain. If you're standing uncomfortably, feel free to just filter into the sides. There's more sort of sitting area, at least on the steps. If you're comfortable standing, that's great. If not, then please move around. There's a couple of seats in the middle here as well if somebody wants to sneak in. All right, so I'm going to go through a few things that I think may be relevant to you. Feel free to take whatever notes. Feel free to ask questions during if something is unclear. I'll try to go through this relatively quick. So 15 pieces of advice. The first thing I'm going to tell you is here's the equation for getting what you want. This is just cutting to the chase. You want to get more. You want more money, a better offer, a better deal. Here are the components of what you need to do. First, they need to like you. All right? So that's the first component. So the things that you do that make them like you less make it less likely that you're going to get what you want. All right? That's not enough. They have to believe that you deserve it. It's not enough that you believe you deserve it. It has to be believable, justifiable to them. Another version of this is don't ever ask for something without giving the explanation for why you think you deserve it, why it's justifiable, why it's a legitimate thing to ask for. Now, I'm going to pause here because even these two elements of the equation often end up conflicting with each other. Occasionally people will tell me, here's what I'm planning to tell them. And a lot of what they're doing is element 2. Explaining why they're so good, explaining how many other people are interested in them, explaining why they're the best MBA student, and how, although you've never hired an HBS MBA student before, I'm really going to bring a lot of value. But the way you're going about targeting number 2 is making them like you less. All right, so you need to make sure you're balancing these two. They need to want to do it for you because they like you, and they need to be able to want to do it for you because it makes sense to do it for you. All right? Next, they need to be able to justify and act on it internally. They may like you, they may think you deserve it, but if they have constraints that you haven't fully acknowledged or understood, you're still not going to get what you want. And different organizations, different people have different constraints. So you want to spend a lot of time figuring out where they're flexible, where they're not flexible. Some of you will run into this when you're going towards a non-traditional job versus a more traditional job for HBS graduates. On the one hand, many non-traditional jobs are likely to offer lower salaries. If they haven't hired a HBS MBA or any MBA before, and they're not used to these levels, on the one hand, they may start out offering less and may end up offering less. On the other hand, they may have much more flexibility on structuring a more creative deal, a more interesting deal, a more valuable deal for you than the standard folks that hire at HBS. So understand where they can give, all right, and how they're going to justify it internally. The person at the table needs to like you and think you deserve it. They need to be able to go back and be able to sell it internally. If they're hiring 20 other people from your school or from similar schools, they maybe can't just give one of you a certain kind of a sweetheart deal, no matter how much they like you, all right? Next, you need to be, to the extent possible, flexible on which currency they pay you in. You shouldn't care about salary. You shouldn't care about your bonus. You shouldn't care about your options. You shouldn't care about which city you're in. You shouldn't care about any one of those things. What you should care about is the value of the entire deal to you. And the more ways in which you give them to pay you, the more likely it is that you'll get paid. So it sort of is a corollary to the point before it, which is, they may have constraints in some areas and not in others. They may be able to justify certain kind of movements, but not others. They may have strong precedent concerns in some areas, but not others. Understand those and give them the flexibility in rewarding you in many different ways, including maybe not rewarding you today, but rewarding you later on. Maybe you can set up a process by which you're not getting anything special today, but you're going to get something as you go forward. So think a little bit more holistically in that way. And you add all those up, and you get a smiley face. I know it's kind of small, but most of the things you're going to negotiate will be small relative to the bigger things in life. So, but you get your smiley face. As I was walking over here, I did think there is one other thing, which sometimes maybe doesn't fully fit into this equation, but is important to keep in mind. And maybe this will come up on another point as well. They also need to believe that they can get you. All right? Nobody's going to go fight for you, go to bat for you, expend political or social capital internally for you if they think at the end of the day they're going to go all out for you and you're going to say thanks, but no thanks. Nobody wants to be the stalking horse for the other job that you really, really want. And that's understandable. You're going to be asking people to go out of their way if you're asking them to change what they originally gave you. So you need to be able to deal with that concern as well. Again, these things sometimes are in tension with one another. There's a little bit of a contradiction here. Maybe the way you get them to like you most, maybe the way you get them to really want you is by explaining to them that everybody wants you. But the more strongly you play that hand, the more they may think, well, we're not going to get him anyway. We're not going to get her anyway. She's too in demand. So there's going to be some judgment at the end of the day. There's going to be some tension. It's not very easy to just add them all up. But these are the things you want to be doing. All right. So that's the first big point. Number 2, don't negotiate just to negotiate. This is especially important if you are taking a negotiations class while at Harvard Business School. You take a class on negotiation, you feel like, well, I took the class. I need to justify having taken it, so I need to go out and show something for it. It's not the way to go about it. There's many more important areas in your life where what you learn in a negotiation class or at a business school are more usefully applied than in your first job with your first boss, just trying to prove that you can get something. All right? So if something is important to you, absolutely. If you truly think you deserve something more or something different, absolutely. Think about the interests that are really important to you, but don't haggle or negotiate over every little thing. You don't want to, fight in order to get a little bit more, in order to feel like, all right, I got something, and then have a lot of negative consequences down the line. All right? So don't negotiate just to negotiate, but if it's important, if it seems relevant, if it's justifiable, by all means. Okay. This is perhaps the most important thing. Well, it's probably the third most important thing I'm going to say in these 15. But it's the most important thing for negotiations as you start out. People often have the sense that negotiation is about walking into the room, walking up to the negotiation table, and convincing the other party about X, Y, or Z. About influencing them, about persuading them, about getting them to move in the direction you want them to move. That plays a part. But nothing is fundamentally more important than understanding the person on the other side of the table from you. Who are they? What do they like? What are their interests? What are their constraints? Learn as much as you can, not just at the table, before you get there and after you leave. You shouldn't be negotiating with a company or even interviewing with a company without exhausting all sources of information that you can before even walking in. Talking to folks in the career and professional development department, talking to friends who have either interviewed there or have worked there or are planning on working there, talking to folks that are in that organization who you may be able to have access to. Learn as much as you can, not just in order to have a good interview. All right, so I can say the right words, I can hit all the key things, I know their culture, but to fully understand what they're looking for you in terms of the value you'll bring to the table, in order to understand where they may or may not be flexible, in order to understand why they're interested in you specifically. The more you get, the better you're going to be as you start negotiating down the line. Okay, next. Negotiate multiple issues or interests simultaneously. Here's what that means. You get an offer, and there's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 things you don't like about it. So you decide to let them know that you want a different offer. What's not a good idea is to send an email that says, you know, the salary is kind of low, could you do something about it? And then they work at it and they come back to you, and then you say, okay, and there's these 2 other things that I'd like you to work on. And then they do those, and then you come back, okay, just one more thing. All right? You can imagine why that's really annoying. All right? It's also not very productive. Again, they're going to go to bat for you. If you ask them to do A, B, C, D, and E, what's often implied is if I do A, B, C, D, and E, we can get you. If all you do is send them a request for a salary or a change in city, and that's the only thing you mention, and they start working hard towards it, they're not going to be particularly in a giving mood when you go to the next stage. The other reason to do this, or the other way to do this, when you mention the 2, 3, 4, or 5 things that you think need addressing, and hopefully it's not as many as 5 or 6 things, but the few things that you need, it's also important to signal to them what is most important and what is less important. And the reason is this. If you talk about salary and start date and you know, your bonus and your stock options or the city you're going to be in, and you mention 4 or 5 things, you don't tell them what's most important, they may pick 2 things that are pretty easy to give you, and they give those to you. And now they feel that they've met you halfway, and you feel like they gave you something not very important. So if there's 1 or 2 really important pieces of interest for you, you want to signal that to them. You know, these are really important. I'm a little bit more flexible here, but if you can do something, that's great. But I really was hoping we'd get some movement on these. All right? Now, again, you want to do it in the appropriate way. You don't want to barrage people with you know, a list of demands. So you want to limit the demands anyway, perhaps. But when you're doing it, don't just go into the and 1 more thing, and 1 more thing, and 1 more thing. If you have legitimate concerns or interests, present them together. There are occasions where these rules are not appropriate, so there's again some judgment, but this is in general how you want to be thinking about it. So I'll always leave a little bit of an exit there. Remember that what is not negotiable today may be negotiable tomorrow. This comes in a few different forms. One I alluded to earlier. Maybe there's not much movement today because they're hiring 20 people just like you, and it's hard for them to differentiate the 20 of you. Every one of you thinks you're better than the other 19. And in their experience, it's hard to tell which one's better. All right? And they definitely don't want to play the game of annoying some people in order to make some people happy. But it may be possible to negotiate those same issues 6 months down the line or a year down the line once a number of things have changed. Maybe you've had the opportunity to convince them that you are different, better, more unique. Or maybe simply they're in a different phase in the employment, so they just happen to have more flexibility. They can do a lot more things once you're one of them than they can do when you're just shopping around. So that's one version of what may not be negotiable today, may be negotiable tomorrow. There's another version of it. What may not be negotiable on day 1 during the job interview process may be negotiable on day 30. For example, they make you an offer, and they have a deadline. We need to know by November 15th or November 20th or December 4th. And you ask them, is there any way I can get more time? The answer may be no. It may be yes. The answer may be no. Okay, well that doesn't mean that it's no forever. When somebody says no in a negotiation, what they're saying is no today. No, in parentheses, the way I see the world today. But that same person, as you get closer to November 15th or November 20th or December 5th, may suddenly have the ability to do things they didn't have the ability to do before. So you want to maybe continue that conversation. Not in the annoying way of calling them up every day and saying, how about now? What about now? I know you said yesterday, but it's a new day. You know, hope springs eternal. Not one of those. But if they've mentioned to you, listen, you know, we can't change the deadline. You know, we need a certain number of hit rate by November 15th. We may need to make sure that our numbers are looking pretty good. We can't just allow people to have a few more months. Otherwise, we can't go to our second list of folks. Well, maybe by November 10th or 12th, they've already met their numbers. Maybe they have some more flexibility. Maybe other things have changed. So what may not be negotiable today may be negotiable tomorrow. And in a reasonable, understanding way, you can broach conversations again. You're only going to do that if when they said no the first time, you ask them, and can you help me understand why that's hard to do? Now you're in a better position to know, well, what might change those facts on the ground? So that goes back to the learning mindset, number 3. They say no, you can say okay, but you can also say, okay, I understand that may be difficult to do. Can you help me understand why that is? Oh, that's interesting. In the past, I've seen that some companies are able to do it and other companies are not. Can you help me understand under what situations you can and can't? Have you ever made that kind of a change? All right. Has there been any experience in the last few years or this year where you have managed to allow people to agree later? So explore, understand, figure out exactly what's going on their end. This leads into the next point, which is stay at the table. It's just a mentality. Stay at the table. Don't negotiate and then you're out of there and then there's no communication. Stay at the table, stay in touch. You never know when you're going to learn more. You never know when they can give you more information. You never know when their constraints change, when their interests change. Stay involved. All right? Don't just check the box. Got that offer. All right, now let's move on to the next one. All right? Stay at the table, stay engaged, get more information. Often what they couldn't share with you before they gave you the offer, they may be able to share after they gave you the offer. What they couldn't share after they gave you the offer, they may be able to share with you once you've accepted the offer. Maybe what they can't share with you after you accepted the offer, they can share with you once you've been working with them 6 months or a year. So stay at the table. Don't just negotiate when it's time to negotiate because, hey, we need to reach a deal on something. Stay at the table with them. Learn as much as you can. As important as it is to come up with a good list of questions that you can ask them and learn as much as you can about where they're coming from, there's going to be times when the other side throws something at you that you were kind of hoping wouldn't be brought up. All right? And the only real solution is to be prepared for those tough questions. And it is, frankly, quite surprising how often people walk into negotiations hoping they don't bring that up, rather than spending a good amount of time thinking about when they bring that up, what's the best way to respond. All right? This could be them asking you, do you have any other job offers? Or the company you worked with over the summer, did they make you an offer? And if the answer is no, you're kind of hoping they don't ask. But that's not good enough. Well, what are you going to say? And if you're unprepared, the most likely thing that's going to happen is you're going to come up with something that either sounds like a lie, or is a lie, or is too defensive, or looks like you're just trying to avoid the question. All of those are bad. In most cases, if the question is, you know, do you have any other job offers, and the answer is no, a confident no is not a problem. You're not the first candidate they've ever worked with. Their only reason to hire you is not that somebody else is making you an offer, though I know there's some industries where that plays a much bigger role than others. Prepare in advance to answer the toughest question. Yes, go in with a game plan. All right? Here's what I need to learn from them. Here's what I need to ask. Here's what I'm going to ask them to improve. Here. All of those things are great. But think about if you're them. What are the things they could ask that would put you in a slightly more defensive position? And, you know, brainstorm with your friends. Talk to other folks. Say, you know, how should I respond to this in a way that I can do truthfully and convey the information they need and yet not look like I'm a bad candidate. All right? There's a quotation. I shared this with my students early on in the course. I'll mention it here. The story, as I hear it, goes as follows. How many of you know who Mike Tyson is? Mike Tyson? Okay, everybody seems to know. Okay. Mike Tyson is a boxer, was a boxer. A rather aggressive boxer, had a lot of problems. Not particularly the nicest guy you're ever going to run into, in the ring or outside of the ring perhaps. But he was very successful. And at some point he was asked, the story goes, you know, how do you manage to continue to be successful when you have to know that everybody who walks into the ring to fight you has prepared specifically to fight you? You know, they've watched your videos, they've read up on you, They've looked at every little piece of every little fight that you've had. They're coming in specifically with a game plan designed to deal with you. So how do you deal with that? How do you deal with that? And Mike Tyson allegedly said, well, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And then the plan unravels. And that is generally true in negotiations. And it's true in job negotiations. You have a script. You have these great ideas. You already know you deserve it. Now you've even come up with the language to, tell them why you deserve it. You're a likable person. You have a list of questions. You have all these alternatives that you're going to throw out and sprinkle at the right time. You got it. And then they come up and come at you with an angle that you were either hoping they wouldn't say or you hadn't expected. So think about what they might be interested in finding out from you and how you might deal with those things, all right? Okay. When they ask you questions that you wish they hadn't asked, questions like, well, if we make you an offer tomorrow, will you say yes? And you don't like that question because you would like to not have committed to an offer before you've seen it, much less negotiated with other people or to get other jobs. Don't get stuck on what they're asking you. Try and figure out why they're asking you that. Is it because they want to make sure that you can't negotiate and they're going to put you in a corner and get you to say yes, and then once they make the offer, you're stuck? Usually that's not it. Why are they wanting to know? What's going on their side? Did they just say it that way because they're not very good communicators and they're just kind of interested in finding out, are you excited about this job? Maybe that's all they want to know. Maybe they actually have some deadline by which they need to have a yes or no. Well, that's different. Maybe this person really doesn't buy that you're interested in them. All right? So where is it coming from? They ask you a tough question or even not a tough question. Before you launch into an answer that targets what they asked, figure out what world you're in. What is their intent? Where are they going with this? Maybe the answer to the question doesn't even give them what they really need, and at the same time puts you in a difficult position. Step back. Can you help me understand where you're going with this? Oh, that's interesting. Well, if the question is, how excited am I about this job? Well, that's easy, ... What do you need to know? You don't have to say yes or no, and you don't have to say yes, or you don't have to avoid saying yes or no and look like you're avoiding the question if you engage in a real genuine conversation about what it is that they're after. So what they're asking is important, but nowhere near as important as why they're asking it. Target the why. To the extent possible, avoid, ignore, downplay ultimatums of any kind in both directions. Don't say things that sound like ultimatums. Don't say ultimatums. so not just things that sound like. Don't make ultimatums. Don't make them feel like you're making ultimatums. Is that a question? Oh, sorry. Yeah. Let me finish the ultimatums, and then we'll go right back to your question. That's a perfectly fine thing to do. People don't like ultimatums. People don't like being told do this or else. Sometimes we present things that sound like ultimatums, even though that's not our real intent. We're just trying to come from a position of strength, and it comes off the wrong way. But it's equally true in the other direction. If somebody says something to you that sounds like an ultimatum, like we will never do X, or under no circumstances can we move in that direction, or that's not possible, my personal advice, my personal approach in those situations is if somebody makes an ultimatum in any negotiation, I just ignore it. I pretend it was never said. And there's a real good reason for this, all right? It's possible that at some point they or someone else will discover that the position they took is going to end up in no deal. And really, they could move if it came down to it. The last thing I want them to feel at that point is I made this big deal about this ultimatum, and now I'm going to lose face by changing my mind. All right? It's easy to get people in negotiations to understand that they've said something they shouldn't have said, or they ask for something that you can't possibly give them. They've overreached. The hard part is getting them to admit it and change their behavior. They'll only admit it and change their behavior if they can do so without looking stupid or silly or losing face. If they make an ultimatum, we'll never do this, we can't do this, I don't make them repeat it. I'm sorry, did you say never? Under no circumstances? Are you sure? No, that's irrelevant. The most I might say is, I can see how that might be a difficult thing for you to do. Now let's talk about X, Y, and Z. Ignore it. Now, if it's a real ultimatum, if they really cannot do it under any circumstances, don't worry, they'll repeat it over and over again. You don't have to make it a thing. Let them make it a thing if it's important. Often people will say things in the heat of the moment, out of frustration, because they're busy, because they didn't think it through, in a way that could trap them and you in the corner. And what you don't want to do is fuel that fire. Just get out of the way of those. Just move out of the way. Okay, your question, sir.
Sorry to speak out.
No, that's okay. No, there are no turns.
Going
There's
back
only,
to the question about trying to discern intent and answer intent,
yeah.
are you recommending that we try and keep that in mind as we passively process a question, or should we actually ask a question back regarding the questioner's intent?
Well, obviously there's no one right answer to every situation. That idea, which is actually not so different from idea number 3 up there, which is trying to learn as much as you can at every moment, could happen before they've asked you the question. They ask you the question, you're not exactly sure where they're going, so you ask for a clarification. Maybe you start answering it and then realize, you know what, I've answered it, but I'm not exactly sure whether they liked my answer, didn't like my answer, got what they needed, they kind of nodded along. Well, I can ask the clarification now. At every point, if there's something you don't understand, if there's something that's ambiguous, if something surprises you, your goal should be to investigate. All right, that's the learning mindset. That's the thing you walk in with. Anytime anybody says anything I didn't expect, or I think is a little bit strange or ambiguous, the number one goal is, let me figure out what game I'm playing. What world am I in? And I don't mean game in a sort of, it's a game, us versus them, but what kind of situation am I in? All right, the better I understand the situation I am, the more wisely I'll deal with that situation. So yes, sometimes a clarification is important. Sometimes they put you in a situation where it seems like, if I don't say yes or no, no matter what, it's going to sound like I'm dodging the question. There's an example. Somebody once wrote a paper on this. I thought it was kind of a silly thing to write a whole paper on because it's a very small point, but it was a really interesting point. How many of you watch Star Trek? Any of you watch Star Trek? Okay. I don't really, but the story comes from Star Trek: The Next Generation. And who's the head guy? Picard or all right. Anyway, so apparently he's on some alien planet, as he tends to be, and he's gotten into some trouble, and he's brought in front of this court. And it's sort of a kangaroo court. They're going to convict him and they're going to kill him. All right? That's what it looks like. Of course, he doesn't die. That's spoiler alert. Anyway, they bring him into this courtroom, and he's prepared to make his defense and his argument, but he knows this is kind of silly. And at some point, the judge says to him, now I'm going to ask you a question. And if the first word that comes out of your mouth is not yes, I'm going to have these people shoot you on the spot. And then he says, the question is something like, are you guilty of crimes against, humanity or something? And he's like, well, that's a tough question to have to say yes to. And so he says, yes, provisionally. And then he goes on to his long speech about why it's not really a yes. All right. So the point, of course, is that the yes under these conditions, yes, but yes, if we assume this, is often a way to deal with situations where people are maybe even unfairly forcing you to take a big position, a big stance on something. Now, that's the whole point. You don't need to write a whole paper about it, I think. But it's a really nice point. All right? Okay. Okay, what do we have next? Okay, so I've sort of implied this. They're not out to get you. It sometimes seems that way. But you got to understand, these people like you. And they want to continue liking you. It's just that you're not the only concern they have in life. Which is bad and good. So the bad part is, well, they're not doing everything they possibly could, or they're not being as responsive, they're not getting back to me in time, even though I have other deadlines. Okay, that's bad. The good part is the part that they're not out to get you. They probably don't have any bad intent. They have their own issues and concerns, and so you can work with them in most cases. So if they're not being responsive, if they're not being sensitive to your deadlines, if they're not exactly moving in the direction you want them to move, don't assume it's because they don't want to or they don't like you. It could be any of those other things. It could just be that they're busy. It could be that they're having a hard time with their kids at home. You don't know what it is. But usually it's not that they're out to get you. And especially if you're dealing with your future boss, they're not out to get you. They may have a personality or a style you're not used to, which sometimes looks like they don't care about you. That may be true. It may be that they're really busy, but they like you. They want to keep you. They're trying to hire you. and they like you at least as much as you like them. All right, and the fact is you're also considering other options, and so it's kind of normal. So don't get too bogged down about that. Keep in mind, whoever you're negotiating with, companies don't negotiate, people negotiate. And every person is different, and part of that difference comes from the role that they inhabit in the company. Negotiating with your future boss is very different from negotiating with the HR person. They require different tactics, different assumptions. You can get different information from them. At the end of the day, it may not be as bad for you if the HR person is slightly annoyed with you. It will be very bad for you if your future boss is annoyed with you. All right? Your future boss may only be hiring you. The HR person may be responsible for 10 different people. The HR person may be more concerned about precedent. Your boss may actually be willing to go to bat for you if they can justify it internally. So understand the person you're negotiating with. What are their interests? What are their concerns? Don't walk away thinking this company doesn't value me because of what one person is doing or saying. All right? Think about who in this company values you and why, and how you can leverage that value that you're bringing to the table for those folks in order to have a good negotiation with the different parts of the company. All right? Incidentally, this sort of goes along. Don't let one person in a company ruin your view of the company. Of course, if that's the person you're going to be working with, then you may choose not to work there. But even there, don't overinflate what one person says or does. Okay. Don't be in a mad rush to get offers. This is a quick point on this. In the beginning of the job market, often we're sort of in a rush to try to get at least one job offer, hopefully many. But then we get one, and then we find out that there's a problem, which is we got one very quickly because we rushed it, and now they want to know in a week, or they want to know in a month, or they want to know in 2 months. And really, I was kind of hoping to stretch this part of my life out a little bit. So it's great to interview early, but occasionally you want to slow down the process. Don't assume the process should always be sped up. Sometimes the better process is a slower process. Again, there's some judgment calls, right? You don't want to slow it down so much that they lose interest or they hire someone else, etc. But don't always be in a rush to get this negotiation done as quickly as possible. Think about the portfolio of negotiations you're doing. Again, that's a broader point. It's not just in job negotiations. You can negotiate each deal perfectly well, but if you're not thinking through the portfolio of deals you're negotiating, you may end up in a place you don't want to end up. All right? So you may want to try, for example, in this case, to have those offers come in a little bit more close to each other than simply one in October, one in December, and one in February. The other ones you might want to move sooner. These you might want to delay, to the extent possible, not always possible. All right, just a couple more to go here. Tell the truth. I'm not sure how much more I need to say about this because that's the whole point. But, resist the temptation to tell even a small lie. This is where everybody's been trying to hammer into the course load, not just in your, leadership and corporate accountability or whatever the course is called, or the ethics discussions in this class. This is what it comes down to. This is, I teach negotiation, so this is your first negotiation. All right, this is the first company you're going to be working with after your MBA. These are the people you're going to be working with in the long term. Even if it was a one-off thing, don't get into the habit of just saying whatever needs to be said to get the deal done, to make a little bit more money. In most cases, because they're not really out to get you, because what really matters is not what they're asking you, but the intent, because there's lots more questions you can ask, because you can do all those things on the equation, in most cases, you can tell the truth smartly and have a good discussion and end up where you want to get. That's negotiating. Yes, there will be occasions where you have to choose between, well, I could tell the truth and I'd probably lose a little bit, or I can lie and get it. Now is the time to get in the habit of never doing that. Don't lie in any negotiation. I know it's kind of like a stupid thing to say because you are who you are and you may not even have to think about it and it may sound kind of preachy, which it is, but it's important. So don't do it. Next, shoot for an 11 out of 10. What do I mean? Occasionally, in a negotiation class, we'll do a negotiation, and afterwards we'll ask people to rate their negotiation partner on a variety of dimensions. So imagine a dimension like how much you look forward to working with this person in the future. When you're negotiating with your future boss or with the company, anybody from that company, imagine that they're going to go back into their office after having the negotiation with you or after reading your email or whatever, and they're going to do two things. One, they're going to either give you or not give you what you asked for. But in addition, they're going to write down on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do I look forward to working with this person? And you should really be shooting for an 11 at that point. You don't want a 9. You certainly don't want an 8, a 7, a 6, a 5, or a 4, any of those. You don't want a 9. Heck, you don't even want a 10. You want even that negotiation to actually make them want to work with you even more than they did before you ask them to give you stuff. That's the goal. To negotiate in a way, openly, honestly, with empathy, with understanding, with give and take, with due deference to their constraints and what they can't be flexible on, so that when they're done, even having improved your offer, they like you more than they did before because of the way you interacted with them. That's the goal, more than before. And finally, everything I've said is less important when it comes to job negotiations than this point. If you're thinking about how happy you're going to be in life, how well you negotiate your job offer is almost, if not completely, unimportant. What is important is which job you take and what kind of industry you go into, what kind of career path you decide to go down. Those decisions are going to be worth so much more to your ultimate happiness, peace of mind, etc., than anything else you do at the negotiation table. There's just no denying that. All right, we know from significant experience, research, etc., that many of our MBA students are not particularly happy a few years out. And many of them continue to not be very happy many years following that, especially when it comes to the career side of things. And you're never going to have as much opportunity and time to reflect and options, not just opportunities and jobs, but options to consider who you really are, as you do now. Some of you will. Occasionally, hopefully, you can build that into your life. But this is a pretty good time to figure out who you are and what you want to do. If there's something that you always kind of thought you might want to try, if there's a part of you that you haven't been able to really, really manifest in your career so far, get that part right. Don't, again, nobody thinks they're following the crowd, but at the end of the day, there's a crowd and everybody seems to be in it. So, think about who you are. I don't think anybody here thinks they're the average Harvard Business School MBA student. And so don't end up behaving like the average Harvard MBA student. And so think about who you are, what you want to do. And if you can pick that correctly and make some tough decisions there now, you're going to end up in a pretty good space. The point I'm making here is simply the first step matters. What you do now matters because usually the second step is just a continuation down the same path. We take the first step and then we take the second step and we take the third step. And the more steps we take, the harder it is to pivot, to turn around, change course, etc. For a whole host of reasons that should be obvious. All right? Okay, I'm going to stop here. We have still plenty of time. And what I'll do is I'll take any questions you may have. Hopefully some of this was useful. Undoubtedly, there's other questions that each of you have that are perhaps idiosyncratic, but maybe even not so idiosyncratic that I can touch on. So if anybody has any questions, what I'll do is I'll take a couple of questions and then I'll just try to hit all of them as efficiently as I can. So if I can just get 2 or 3 questions. Yes, ma'am.
So this is a really tactical question, but like when your boss or HR member says, how can we make this offer more attractive? Like, what are you supposed to say? Are you supposed to talk numbers, or do you say like, let me get back to you? Like, how long should the timeline be for that conversation? Just like, what do you actually say in that conversation?
Okay, let's get a couple more questions. Yeah.
Yeah, just in relation to that, how do you find out information about what is on the table for negotiation?
Okay.
And that's either before you get the job, or let's say when you're in the job and you've been offered a bonus.
Okay, so let's do the 2 of these together because they seem to be pretty well related. Okay, on the tactical side, when somebody asks how can we make this better for you, it could be that they're asking for at least some answer in the next 15 seconds. But I don't know of anybody who would be offended if somebody said, I think that's a great question. Obviously, I've given it some thought, but I've learned so much more during the interview process. Would you be okay with me coming back to you after I sleep on it a little bit more? I mean, would you be offended if somebody said that to you? No, I don't know anybody who would be offended by that. So if you don't have a good answer, and the honest answer is I need some time, then that's the answer you should give them. All right? If the question is, is this good enough, or are there things that we could improve? You say, well, I appreciate the offer. It's very nice. There are some things that I might want to. Again, if you're prepared, you launch into it. If not, you take your time. All right? Whether you need a day or a week, again, what's the honest truth? What do you need it for? Right? Would it be okay if I came back to you a week later, because that gives me the opportunity to talk to some of the other folks that I got to meet today? So I think I'd be a better person to answer that question after that rather than right now. So I think those are all perfectly appropriate. Don't feel compelled to answer it right away, unless of course their intent is they need to write something down. Well, yeah, okay. So again, now what do you ask for in some sense? How do you find that out? Well, again, in general, if it's a company that hires tons of people from a school like this, well, you can probably find out just by talking to other folks. And you can know that they'll probably be a little bit less flexible on certain issues. It becomes more interesting if they may have some flexibility. And talking to the people that are at that company, learning about their culture and what they seem to value, looking at how long people stay, all of those things give you some information. But at the end of the day, there's nothing wrong with asking the person you're negotiating with. Hey, listen, there are certain things that I was hoping would be a little bit different. We discussed this earlier. You know, the salary is obviously a little bit lower than my other offers or than what I was making before. In addition, you know, I was kind of hoping to start here 2 or 3 or 4 things. Can you give me some idea as to where you may have greater or less flexibility, right? At the end of the day, I want to work at a company that not only do I love and for whom I can create a lot of value, but I want to create the kind of package that works for both of us. And I know what I need maybe overall, but I'm flexible on how we get there. So can you help me understand what's easier? Or, you know, maybe they've already signaled to you for quite a while that they can't be flexible on X. Fine, explore a little bit more. When is there flexibility on that? Has there ever been flexibility on that? If not, where do you tend to be more flexible? Or talk to the current employees there. Did you negotiate your offer? Did people take to it okay? Were they okay with that? Okay, and what worked and what didn't work? I think people are usually okay with that kind of conversation. All right? Let's get a couple more. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so the company I interned with, so by the time I finished the internship, they told me we like you. If you make up your mind, we'd be happy to have you. But you know, when it's an open offer or oral offer, when is the best time for you to go back? You don't want to go back when you have only like one option and let them know that you do not really have any alternatives. That would put you into a bad negotiation position.
Okay. Well, let me ask you a couple of quick questions. So, are there other companies that you think might give you an offer that you would like more than these folks, or?
Shopping around.
Okay, so you're still shopping around, and some of them may beat this, or are you shopping around, but this is still going to be your best, you think?
It's one of the.
Yeah, we wanted to. So you're waiting more than any reason because there may actually be some that are even better than this.
Should I go back to them before I make up my mind, or should I go back to them after I find out that they are the best option?
Okay, so one of the things that this gets to is this notion of staying at the table. I think you want to stay at the table. If you are at all concerned about them having made a verbal offer, but then, you know, over time that just sort of dissipates, they sort of lose their commitment to it, they're already fully looking for other people, you may miss the boat. If there's any risk of any of that, you want to make sure you stay at the table and at least stay engaged. You don't necessarily have to rush if written offer, but if every week or every couple of weeks or every month you're talking with your boss from the summer and saying, hey, listen, I just wanted to update you on how things are going, just wanted to see how things are going over there. Can you help me understand what the process tends to be for you folks when you have a summer intern? Learn what their process tends to be. When do they need to make hiring decisions? Don't push them on an offer if you're not in any rush to get one, but just make sure there's no chance that you get tossed from the list simply because you didn't seem interested. So if there's any risk of that, stay at the table, learn more about their process, make sure they know you're still interested, but don't push them for something in writing unless they say, well, you know what, actually, I'm kind of glad you called. We had kind of started to think that maybe you're not that interested. We're actually in the process of giving offers now. Oh, well, glad I called. What's the process typically? You make offers and then what? Oh, would you be flexible in that? Oh, okay. What do you need from me, et cetera, et cetera. So stay engaged. Yes, sir. One here, and then we'll take one over there.
I graduated in '94. I didn't expect you to talk here today.
Sorry, say again?
I graduated in '94.
You graduated in '94?
Yes, I didn't expect you to your conference here today. So I just want to hear, listen. I've been in the workforce 20 years. I think your point number,
Which one?
number, don't rush your offers.
Uh-huh.
That's the best point.
That's the best one? All right. Should I put that number 1 next time, or just put it in bold, maybe, or?
I'm not trying to challenge you.
No, I appreciate it. Okay, good. More questions like that would be welcome. Yes, ma'am.
I'd love to talk about when to know to walk away, or when to know, like, when do you actually know that, like, it's over, and when should you sort of step back and know to stop versus do you?
Sorry, when is what over? That you're not getting the job, or they're not improving the offer?
The offer to sort of communicate that.
Well, there's some sure signs. If they're really annoyed at you, stop. But here's the general rule, and then how you apply it tactically differs. So my view is this. You never want a negotiation to end with a no. You want it to end in one of two ways. Either a yes or an explanation as to why not. So when somebody says no to me, that's okay. Sometimes they can't do anything. I get that. This may be out of bounds. It may not be possible. Too many constraints. No, they don't. What I want to do is, if I get a no, I want to at least understand why not. Once I have an explanation for why they think they can't do it, then I can make up my mind as to, okay, this is probably not worth beating my head over. All right? So if I have no idea why not, then maybe the conversation should continue. But once they've explained to me why not, and there doesn't seem to be much that I can do about it, that's great. So that's one answer. Make sure you're not just getting no 5 times. Make sure you're getting no once and then 4 explanations, if anything. All right? And the second piece of it is, often they'll be signaling to you, we really can't do anything. And you'll push back a little bit more, and they'll say something like, I thought we kind of made it clear that that's not possible. Okay, well, take that as a hint. If they're having to repeat themselves, and it's not because you're asking the same question over and over again, then that's maybe another signal. But again, keep going until you get what you want, which may not be the case, but at least you understand why they're not giving it to you. And then it's perfectly fine to say, okay, it's not worth doing. All right? Sir.
What are the best ways of using an offer to negotiate, another offer to negotiate? Do you kind of just, can you say that like, oh, my other offer is paying me X, you should also pay X, or what are the best ways to do it?
Okay, so so it depends. So if the other offer is paying you a lot less, that's probably not the right thing to do. Listen, so in a world where your other offer is pretty good or more, and the other offer, and again, you may not have any other offers, but the other things that you can bring to the table. What you used to make before you started your MBA is a perfectly fine thing to bring up. What the average MBA student makes is a perfectly fine thing to bring up. What the average person in this job or industry makes is a perfectly fine thing to bring up. These are all types of justifications for what you want to ask for. So yes, one good one is my other offer is offering X. Whether you have that or not, what you're probably going to do is say, how can I make a compelling case that I deserve more? And you just happen to have picked one of the 4 or 5 or 6 ways in which you can do it. And you bring it up, depending on whether it's worth bringing up, whether it helps make the case, and what's relevant to the people on the other side. Some people are glad you brought that up because when they go back to their committee and they have to say, hey, we got to give this guy more because he's got offers from X, Y, and Z, and at least 2 of them are significantly higher than what we're paying, and we could stretch and make it. Great. Other people don't even care to know about that. They're in a different industry. They say, I know you're making a lot more there. Now, you may still bring it up because you want to push them up a little bit. There's no doubt about that. But it won't necessarily play the same role. So what you want to think about is what are all the justifications I can make to justify the offer I want to ask for. So they're offering me this. I want this. What's the story I need to tell them? Sometimes a part of that is, yes, I have other offers, and they're here. But just remember, if your other offer is here, you may lose them on, are we ever going to get this guy? So if you're going to bring up that offer, it better be followed by, and of course I know you can't match at that level, but I did want to suggest to you, I am willing to give up a fair amount of money to work with the kind of company that you are and the kind of opportunity you give to folks at this stage in the career. But to the extent that you can bridge that gap a bit, it would be pretty useful for me. All right, so yes, by all means use it. Don't throw it in their face too hard. Give it to them as information.
Yes, sir. Is there any specific guidance you would offer to a student that might be sponsored that's going to the negotiating table on what they're going to do next? If the company has significant financial leverage over them and their opportunity?
So what's the question?
Does any of this change if you don't really have the ability to walk away as easily as someone who might have 2 or 3 job offers and the ability to go from one to the other?
Yeah, where you come off on the trade-offs changes depending on your situation. You've given one version of what makes it hard to walk away. All right, some people don't walk away because they're too risk averse. Some people can't walk away because they have young kids. 5 years from now, it may be a different reason. So yes, the principles I think are all still relevant. They don't change, but the trade-offs you make may change. If what they've offered you is this offer plus implicitly $150,000 or $100,000 on tuition, well, that's part of the offer they're giving you. All right, and so it's going to be a judgment call. Now, what I think is if you don't fall into the category of folks who, you know, if you take on that debt, you're going to be, you know, on the street, or you have young kids to feed, or anything else, then number 15 is still the most relevant piece of advice, which is, you know, do I want to be stuck here for the rest of my life, or am I willing to take that hit and do the one thing I really, really wanted to do? So if anything, I would say you end up having to pay more attention to that. It becomes more salient that you're going to have to give up more than your friends will. On the other hand, if they've already paid the tuition, then you're really no different. The last thing I'll say is the framing matters. When they've paid for it and you're thinking of it as an additional $100,000 hit or more, it just seems much worse and dumber to say no to that money than if you'd paid your own way through loans. And yet it's really the same thing at the end of the day. So yeah, you're making, you have a job offer, forget you're sponsored, you have a job offer and they threw on, you know, your loan forgiveness or something. Well, how much do you value that? It's just one of the 5 or 6 or 7 things you value. Just like you value which city you're going to be in, just like you value your salary and your bonus and the job and the boss and the industry, it's just one more thing you value. Don't overvalue it, because sometimes people put that in just a totally different category. Oh, but sponsorship. Oh, but I'm sorry, I got my hands tied. I'm not like everybody else. No, you're just like everybody else. You just happen to have identified yet one more interest that you have, and now weight it appropriately rather than everything else and then 50% of the variance goes to this. No, it's probably a lot less than that. All right? Yes, sir.
What would be advice on discerning between constraints for the other party? Some of the constraints that they're putting might be real, but some of them might be just posturing and artificial. So what would be advice for us to how to discern between those?
Yeah, lots of judgment here, but I'll give you just one piece of advice on this. So I find that the way in which you ask a question has a huge impact on what they share with you, even controlling for how much they intend to share with you. So they either want to share a lot or not. We can't necessarily change that in a moment, but how we ask can make a difference. So when somebody says, no, we just can't do that, questions that sound like one of the following. I'll give you 2 examples, I guess. I often ask people, imagine a situation where you could do that. Imagine a world in which that was possible. Describe that world to me. What would have to be different about that world in which you'd be able to do it? And then people have to paint that picture for you. And it gives you a little bit of better idea about what is causing that constraint. All right? Another possibility, a little bit along the lines of what we've already discussed, is can you give me an example of situations where you've done that? Now, it's easy to make you say, I just can't do that. When people say, I just can't do that, in their mind, they're interpreting it as, I'm telling this person, this would be very hard for me to do. I'm not really lying to this person. I just said, I just can't do that. But when you ask them, have you ever done that before in any conditions? And they have. They're a little bit more likely to then have to, quote unquote, fess up. And say, well, there have been extreme cases where we've ended up doing that. You know, can you tell me when that happened? I know I may not fall into one of those categories, but it's just kind of useful to know how the process works. And then sometimes they're a little bit more open to it, right? Now, there's other things you can do. You can talk to other folks. You can triangulate. You can say, well, the HR person told me this. What do you think? You have to be careful that you don't look like you're going over someone's head. But you can still try to get information from different angles and see if that helps as well.
Do you have like different type of advice for negotiating in like really small company where it's like 5 to 10 people, no HR at all, and where if you have like a really close relationship with the person that you're negotiating?
Well, you know, in some ways, everything we're saying becomes even more important, right? So it probably means that the range of outcomes is much higher. You could end up getting a lot less or a lot more because there's very little precedent. They're not concerned about the other people they're hiring that year, potentially. You have a relationship, so there's already some goodwill there. So I would say, you know, being more honest becomes more important. Learning more about what they can and can't do becomes more important. Making sure they like you becomes more important. And the range of things you can get from them is a lot more. Now, keep in mind, I'm saying the range is bigger. I'm not saying the upper end of that range is higher than what you can get with a traditional offer. But if in a traditional offer, the range is this, in a non-traditional setting, the range may be this, all right? And so you want to play your cards right even more so. And by playing your cards, I mean learning as much as you can about where they're coming from. And there's one more thing. It's not, here influence and persuasion does matter. A person who's never hired a Harvard Business School MBA or any MBA is maybe even more open to learning from you what it is that you can bring to the table. Maybe they're undervaluing you not because they don't have as much money, they're undervaluing you because they don't know what you can do well, all right? So if you can make the case, if you can advise or inform them about how much other people make in companies like this or with the kind of experience you have, they may be more persuadable. So maybe that range goes from here to even here. So that may be possible as well. So it becomes more of a two-way conversation, not just understanding and structuring, but educating them as well about what's possible. The last thing you want is to be underemployed by the same company that could have given you full employment. All right? If they're going to put you in a role, in a position because they think that's their need, but you can do even more for them, have that conversation. That's the best conversation you can have. What if we were to increase the scope of what I can accomplish? Maybe not today, but over the next 3 years. Could we structure a deal that if we do this, this, and this, I'm in this position? So all of this, I think, just becomes more important because where you can end up is so varied. Right?
Yes, ma'am. Then I'll jump back to you.
So you mentioned the currencies, the flexibility in currencies. What are some creative and often overlooked types of currencies that MBAs don't bring to the table, or you know?
Everything except salary. I mean, I think people are overly focused on salary more than they're under focused on any one thing. I think that's definitely a piece of it. But what's the standard stuff? So okay, maybe I'll add one thing, which I briefly touched on before. So certainly you can just list all the things you care about. You know, which city you're going to be on, what kind of project you're going to be on, what kind of responsibilities you're going to have, what your start date is, you know, if you want to take the summer off or whatever else you want to do. People may be able to give you some money for your MBA, you know, the loan stuff. But it's putting yourself in position for the next negotiation, which is often a good thing to do and maybe the last thing that you could ask for, is to say, I can't do this, I understand you can't give it to me today, but can we do something about this in 6 months or a year? And people are often more open to that. Now, the easy one is being in a different office or a city. Sometimes you can work that conversation in. Fine, we can't start there today, but can we do that in X amount of time? But that's also true about your first performance review. It's also true about the kind of bonus you may get. You know, I know I'm starting halfway through the year, and my year-end bonus is going to be prorated accordingly, but could we make a case for getting the full year because ... All right? So there is some of that you can do. I think one of the things that we often forget to do is negotiating for things that they can give us in the future. It's often a lot easier for people to say yes to something that they don't have to give you for a year than to say something, a yes to something they have to give up right now when they're in the middle of a very bureaucratic process. The only thing to keep in mind is they may just promise that and say it, but you need to stay at the table over that next 6 months to a year to make sure they don't forget it. To make sure that they didn't leave the company and now nobody in the company owes you that. To make sure there was no misunderstanding. To make sure that as the company's needs change, they don't conveniently ignore it. So again, in a respectful sort of way, you want to make sure you're at the table and making sure those things happen. So.
Assume a situation where we have another offer and the other company is asking for what the offer from the competitor is. Going forward, let's say we have two options. We can give that offer and hope that they would match it or beat it, something like that, and come back. Or we can say, no, I'm not going to tell you what the other offer is. I'd rather hear first back what you have to say. And taking the second option, the HR person sort of advises you not to take that route, rather says, this is a larger company, you know, the people who actually can make the decisions, I only get to see them once a week. It would be free to give me a stuff right now. Still, if you don't want to do it, it's fine, but I would highly advise you to let us know.
You know, when somebody highly advises you to do something, you know, it's probably a good idea, yes. Especially in a conversation where they're not out to get you, really. But the question was, you know, you have an offer from Company A. Company B wants to know what Company A is offering before they really structure their offer. Yes. You know, ideally that doesn't come up. But if it does, again, if A is pretty good, you tell it. And I mentioned this to you a little bit when we were talking offline, but the way I would think about it is a couple things. One, if offer A is also negotiable, you can signal that when you tell them what it is. So I say, well, I have X as my salary from offer A, but as you know, even that's negotiable, and we haven't discussed those, so it's going to be this or higher. So that gives you some leverage for the future. The other thing is, don't let them walk away thinking all you care about is that one issue either. At the end of the day, you should have the ability to say, I know you're offering the same amount as them, but for the following reasons, I could use some more. All right? Now you have to think about what those reasons are and what it is, but or less. They should also be able to know whether you can accept a deal that's different on salary than the other one. So I would say, listen, you're asking me to say something that I feel uncomfortable about, not because I have any problem with the transparency element, but because I think if I'm transparent on just one element, you may overweight that in your own discussions. Right? So you know what they're offering me on salary, and you can compare those. But there's lots of other things about that job that I wish you could understand as well, so that the package of offers you make me is compelling. So here's the offer. Here's what it is. It's higher than what maybe you are used to, but let's have this be a conversation. So if you're welcome to having this as a conversation rather than a one-off thing, then here's the information you need. Again, if you can avoid having to give up too much information before you get an offer, great. But if they're saying, listen, everybody knows you have this other offer, and they'll know you didn't want to tell us what it is. Bad taste in people's mouth. Number one is the problem. They don't like you. And everything else is almost secondary. And this is before they've given you the offer. So it's one thing to be disliked after they've given you the offer. Very bad. Much worse to be disliked before they've even chosen to hire you. We're at 4:30. I'll take just maybe one or two questions from people we haven't heard yet, and then we'll see what we can do. We're in the middle here.
Any advice on how to deal with things like exit clauses and things like non-competes? And those are kind of unpleasant things to talk about while you're getting an offer. Any advice on how to navigate stuff like that?
It depends on what you mean by how to navigate that. When they're...
Is there a lot of room to negotiate that? How do you, I guess, any tips on how to negotiate that without getting them to not like you? Because you're talking about a prenup or a divorce before you're getting married, right? Because you're talking about a non-compete. So, is there any way to have that conversation without leaving a sour case?
Yeah, I mean, it's maybe a little bit more idiosyncratic to you, but so we can talk about this afterwards. But in general, keep in mind, both sides tend to know these are uncomfortable conversations and legitimate conversations. I don't know people who don't at some point, people who are hiring, understand that folks don't like to be too tied down because this may not work out, it may just be a bad match, etc. At the same time, if you look like you just want all the flexibility in the world, you've never signaled real commitment anyway, you might fall into the category of the people that they're most worried about. It's about striking the balance. It's about understanding what exactly their core concerns are. Maybe you can carve out some kind of non-compete that's not a very broad non-compete. Say, listen, what's your real concern? Well, our real concern is you end up with company X. Okay, what if we carve that out? Well, our real concern is you get training in the first 6 months, you're gone in the 7th month, and all of our investment is gone. What if we made the non-compete a little bit shorter than the 4 years you proposed? Understanding where they're coming from, why exactly they want something, gives you more options always. Then you can maybe meet halfway or target their core concerns, still show some flexibility, and work on all the other elements that they're worried about. And maybe you can reach some sort of deal. I'm going to be mindful of where we are in the time, and I also have to go home and on the way home pick up my kids, so I definitely don't want to lose that negotiation. So I'll stick around for another just maybe 5 minutes here if you just want to stop in and either say something or ask something really quickly on the way out. Good luck with your negotiations. Good luck with your career search and your career. And stay in touch if something really interesting happens. And be happy. All right. Take care.